Hey, New York. David Byrne was putting on a big performance, and I was asked to make a documentary about the show. Thankfully, my professional relationships at home were disintegrating, so I had a little free time on my hands, and I said, sign me up. They invited me to a production meeting at David's office and let me listen to their production schedule. I figured this would be an excellent opportunity to network and prove I was a skilled, capable documentarian. But it already seemed like they had a documentary team shooting most of the action with much nicer equipment, so I decided to take a back seat and let them run the show. And then at the end of the meeting, I set out in a van with a few talented filmmakers as we made our way to our first show in Toronto. Now, this trip also happened to coincide with the escape of 2 inmates from a state penitentiary somewhere in upstate New York near the Canadian border. The upstate region was on high alert, so we kept seeing their headshots at every gas station we passed. David Sweat and Richard Matt were serving life sentences in the Clinton Correctional Facility. Sweat was convicted of murdering a police officer after he was discovered transferring stolen weapons on the 4th of July. The fugitives supposedly escaped on foot from a jail which would have placed them a little closer to Montreal, but at this point, it could have been hiding anywhere. So, as we drove through Niagara and approached the Canadian border, there seemed to be a strange tension in the air. The scales of justice had tipped, and order needed to be restored. So, after hiding a small bit of marijuana in a tree outside of the border, we effortlessly crossed over into the Great White North. Richard Matt was originally arrested for kidnapping his boss at a supermarket, driving him upstate, dismembering him with a hacksaw, and finally throwing his remains into the Niagara River. It also seemed like he was a talented painter. He made paintings that he sent to his friends and family from inside prison of some of his favorite celebrities, and eventually even bribed a guard with his artwork. It was then I realized that every rest stop we took could have been our last, and that even great artists can commit terrible crimes. When we finally got to our Airbnb 2 hours later, we made sure to unplug the security cameras in all the rooms, which there were a lot of. Now, there's a lot that goes into a big show with a lot of talented performers. Directing a show of this scale takes a lot of grace, coordination, and a dash of wonder. First thing that needs to happen is that the floor needs to be buffed. It needs to be professionally buffed. And then you need to make sure that the crew knows where they are in the stadium just so they don't get lost during the performance. You're also going to have to clear out all the equipment from the previous event to make room for your gear. It seems like Bette Midler performed here the night before, so they're going to have someone take care of her mess. You're also going to need to make sure you have the right uniforms for the whole crew so everyone is easy to identify. But costumes like this may make it a little harder to tell them apart from the inmates. Now, the camera team is a crucial part of this whole operation. There's a lot of planning that goes into capturing all the right stuff with the most state-of-the-art equipment available. This involves not only a team of dedicated camera operators, but a bunch of assistant camera people that keep their wheels greased throughout the show. I didn't have an assistant camera, so I had to take time out and get my batteries myself, which was okay. I also seemed to be the only one worrying about the safety of the crew while these savage felons were still at large. They all seemed to be distracted by the jobs they were hired to do, while I was still struggling to figure out what my job was. I was careful not to lower my guard, not even during the lunch break, because I'd also read that with the aid of a rock guitar playing guard, the escaped convicts cleverly smuggled their escape tools in prison hamburger meat. So I kept an eye out for foreign objects, because who knows what could be simmering at the bottom of the catering tray. When I was done with lunch, I made sure to put my food in the appropriate slot and hit up the dessert table for a cone before I headed back to work. I was sensing some hostility from the documentary crew, so I decided to take a walk around downtown Toronto and see what that city was all about. Parts of Toronto looked a lot like New York, but the downtown is a little different. In this neighborhood, you end up walking for a while, but not really getting anywhere. During my walk, I even stumbled across a couple of the performers being interviewed by a local news crew for man-on-the-street interviews. I figured it was about the show, but it turned out they were just talking politics. And when I got back, it seemed like they were putting all the finishing touches on the show and finally letting everyone into the arena. Now, as all great documentarians know, the closer you are to the subject, the closer you are to the truth. So I went on stage for a minute to see if I can get a quick interview. But it turned out to be really bad timing because they were performing. So I decided to get some B-roll instead. I noticed that the team was getting a few creative angles, so I thought it would be nice to take a few artistic shots of my own that maybe I could use for my reel. And at that point, I checked my phone to see if I missed any emails about potential upcoming work. But thankfully, no one had contacted me. And then before I knew it, the show was over. And I had missed most of the actual performance. And afterwards, everyone assembled to eat some chocolate cake backstage. But I tried to save a piece just in case we had any surprise visitors during the celebration on this very special day. The next morning, we all packed up, reconnected the security cameras, and headed back to Niagara Falls for a trip on the Hornblower cruise. They never found the head of the dismembered corpse they found floating in the Niagara River. After taking a souvenir photo and putting on our complimentary ponchos, we boarded the Hornblower and set off towards the falls. I tried to get a nice panoramic shot of the waterfall, but it was a little difficult with all the wind and the crowd. But I was eventually able to get a really nice shot. And it was a really hot day, so the water actually felt really nice. One of our producers even decided to cool down with a chocolate banana with extra sprinkles. Attaboy. And as soon as we crossed the border, we went back to the park and took our drugs out of the hole in the tree. And took the long trip back to New York City. Once we got back, all the newspaper headlines said that they had tracked down and killed one of the convicts. He had been living in a small cabin in the woods in upstate New York and was shot dead by local police officers. They had evaded capture for over 2 weeks since their escape. But once they split up, they didn't stand a chance. This meant that there was still one of them on the loose. And who knew how long it would be until they finally caged him again. The last stop was the Barclays Center in Brooklyn for the final 2 nights of the show. There were a few new additions to the team once we hit NYC, and after a quick tour, we had a crew lunch. The food at the Barclays Center was much better, and they even gave the food nice names. But there wasn't enough room at the table, so some people had to improvise in the production office. Everyone seemed pretty busy right before the show, so I decided to get some nice establishing shots of the venue, just in case they didn't have a chance to make it outside. And then, when I covered that, I went back inside and made myself a PB&J, PB sandwich. At least someone got it right. Attaboy. And then as the show started, I again tried to let the doc team do their own thing, because they still seem to be covering all the important stuff. So I tried to get a few final beauty shots for my sizzle reel.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friends, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I live a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this. I did it my way.
The next morning, it was revealed that David Sweat was shot and captured by federal agents after he was spotted jogging down the road a mile and a half away from the Canadian border. A cell phone photo started circulating quickly of his capture, and a sense of justice was restored in the world, and spirits were high. And during the last show, there was a feeling of intense pride, as we could all resume our lives without the creeping fear of a fugitive attack. And it was such an honor to be part of such a wonderful crew during such a frightening chapter in American history. And hopefully my footage will help me get a few more jobs like this sometime in the future. But it may be hard with such gifted competition. And I couldn't help but to think back to when we began. It seemed like everyone had such bright futures. And I couldn't help but wonder where we'd all end up one day. This is John Wilson. Thanks for watching my movie.